10 minutes was all it took for my life to rearrange itself. 10 minutes while I waited in the kitchen for my husband to come home, and my son was on the couch laughing with the woman who would change everything. That's the line I would use to pull you in, because the truth is, betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting and slammed doors. Sometimes it comes in the warm tilt of a smile, the casual lean of a shoulder, the quiet way two people start keeping one another's secrets. My name is Rachel. I was married to Mark for 26 years. He is the kind of man who made his wife feel safe by default, dependable, practical, a Sunday morning husband with coffee-stained shirts and a laugh that filled the garage. Our son, Ethan, was 28 when all this began. He'd come home after a breakup, exhausted and a little raw, and I thought we could stitch him back together with lasagna and bad TV. Instead, he met Claire. Claire worked with Mark. She was younger than me, not by a scandalous amount, but enough that in a different life, she might have been an armful of possibility rather than a footnote in our story. She had a voice like warm molasses and a habit of tucking hair behind her ear when she was nervous. She was also married. At first it was innocent, chuckles over the sink, shared recipes, a plant Mark forgot to water that Ethan instinctively revived. The thing about small, repeated kindnesses is that they lay down a road that only later reveals where it goes. I should say, I knew there was distance between Mark and me. We had fallen into the same co-parenting rhythm that keeps a family from falling apart, but doesn't exactly keep anyone alive inside. We were polite and familial and predictable. Infidelity doesn't always explode out of nowhere. Sometimes it eats at the edges of a life that's already fraying. Still, when Mark's phone lit up with Claire's name and he began staying late, for meetings, I did what I'd always done. I trusted him. I gave him space to be a man with a job. I was wrong. The first move was small. Ethan, fragile, tender from his breakup, started spending more time with Claire, easing into conversations about music and old hurts. I remember watching them once through the doorway as they compared playlists, the two of them leaning into a shared joke, and feeling a cold surprise like someone had opened a window in the middle of July. It wasn't the joke itself. It was the way Ethan S.'s hand brushed against Claire S. as she reached for a mug. People touched, people comforted. But the line between comfort and something else is thinner than we like to admit. There was a moment, though, that changed everything. Mark and Claire's affair, because yes, it existed, quiet and persistent, was a shock when it finally landed. Not because I hadn't suspected, but because betrayal never looks like what you plan for. It tasted like cheap takeout and felt like the hollow of our bed. I confronted Mark. He looked at me like a man who had been found out but not yet ready to face the wreckage. He apologized in that soft, apologetic way he always used. Small, plausible, the kind of apology that glided over the surface without touching the hurt beneath. Ethan's crossing of the boundary didn't happen on a night of loud arguments. It happened the day after everything came out, when the house smelled like bleach and grief, and Claire came over to talk, and instead of leaving when the talk turned complicated, she sat on our old plaid couch and let Ethan take her hand. She said she was sorry. He said he understood. He was 28, and he loved the idea of fixing things. He was a son who wanted to protect his father, and a man who suddenly wanted to be someone else. Consolation. The way he looked at Claire, with an earnest, almost worshipful tenderness, made my skin crawl with betrayal in a way I hadn't expected. He wasn't just someone's child in that moment. He had become a player in a romance that had already stolen pieces from our family. Romantic tension in real life is messy. It's not the red-filtered slow motion you see in movies. It is the way Claire would glance at Ethan and then look away when Mark came into the kitchen. It is how Ethan started calling to check on Claire, as a friend, and how those calls stretched into late-night texts. It's how the house grew smaller, because we were all learning new, awkward steps around one another. The worst moments were the quiet ones. Claire trying to normalize her presence at the dinner table, Mark hovering at the edge like a man watching a ship leave the harbor and not wanting to jump in. I felt like a third wheel in my own life, watching my son and husband orbit a secret I had to decide whether to name aloud. Confrontation followed. Tears, accusations, explanations that felt like thin gauze over gaping wounds. Ethan insisted he hadn't meant to hurt me. Mark assured me he loved me in the only way he knew how. Claire apologized, sometimes twice in one conversation, her voice breaking like someone trying to ask for forgiveness without understanding the debt. At night I lay awake trying to trace a map backward, where the first misstep had been, who had first crossed what line. But the map kept unspooling, revealing that boundaries had been ambiguous for a long time, and then, one night, they simply weren't. I won't lie and say there weren't moments where I wanted retribution, where a small, bitter part of me imagined the perfect scene of moral correction. But revenge is a hollow remedy. What surprised me was not fury, but a profound sorrow for the people I loved. My son, who had been my little boy and then my roommate and then my pride, had made choices that made him someone I didn't recognize. My husband, who still had a way of making coffee just the way I liked it, had allowed himself to believe something that erased what we'd built. And Claire, who had been both the flame and the match, was human in ways that made sympathy complicate my anger. Healing, when it began, was not cinematic. It was hallways walked without slamming doors, counseling sessions where everyone learned to speak and listen without cutting. Ethan moved out for a time, not because I wanted him gone, but because our cohabitation had become an unhealable pressure. Mark and I went to therapy and discovered the language to say what we'd been avoiding for years. Claire left town. Some things could not be repaired in the presence of the person who caused the fracture. Time did what time does. It dulled the sharpness, taught us new routines, and made space for awkward apologies to heal into something like a future. If there is one thing I want anyone listening to take away, it's this. Boundaries matter, but so do the reasons we cross them. Sometimes people cross lines out of selfishness, sometimes out of loneliness, sometimes out of a desire to be seen. None of those reasons make the crossing acceptable, but they do make the people involved human. Infidelity is a brutal teacher, and its lessons are messy and lifelong. I am not proud of what happened in my family. I am not claiming to be a hero. I am, however, here to say that even after the crossing, after the rupture, people can, and sometimes do, choose repair. So what would I tell my younger self? Trust your instincts sooner. Name the small discomforts before they become large betrayals. And remember that love, the kind that survives, is not a single grand gesture. It is a succession of tedious, brave, and honest conversations. If you're watching this because something similar has happened to you, know that you are not alone. If you're the one who crossed the boundary, know that there will be consequences, and owning them is the first honest thing you can do. If you want to talk about this, to unpack it, or to hear more about how we found our way back to something resembling peace, leave a comment below. I'll read them.